Well, hello there, folks, and welcome to our very awesome webinar on managing hiring managers and building credibility. You should be looking at the main screen now with Carmen and I probably in tiny little boxes off to the left. And we will go full screen to start answering your questions soon. But of course, as the flight attendant of recruiting, I'm going to go through a few instructions about how to use GoToWebinar because they are ultra important today with this model for a webinar. And I'll get into how it's going to work very soon. So the first thing you need to know is that if you're having any trouble hearing either of us, you want to change your audio. By default, you're dialed in using your mic and speakers. That means that you are relying on your internet. And if your internet is bad, you're going to want to use a telephone. So if you just click use telephone, that'll give you all the dial-in information you need to be able to hear us again. The second thing you want to know is how to ask a question. So today's webinar is built entirely around questions submitted by our audience. If you have a burning question that's sitting in the back of your head right now, go ahead and submit it through that question pane. I'll be able to see that, and then I can put them in the order that they're received so that Carmen and I can talk through how her advice and maybe a little bit of color commentary from me about how you can resolve that within your organization. We already have a few, so if you have one of those burning questions, you might want to go ahead and put it in now. Now, really quick, I want to, of course, give a little promo. Recruiting Daily is sponsoring today's webinar, and we right now are running a sign up for the 12 days of sourcing. That means you'll get 12 days of sourcing tools, tips, and tricks straight to your inbox. And if you go to that URL that you're looking at on the page right now, you'll be able to sign up, and those will start at the end of this week. Now, let's get to the good stuff. All right, this is the little slide about Carmen and I, but really, we don't need that. We can just look at our faces. Thank you, Carmen. So glad you're here. Now, Carmen, why don't you tell people a little bit about you? I'm sure they know who you are, but I'd love for you to give people a little bit about your background and context for this conversation.
Where shall I start? The log cabin, or which is to say that I've been doing this, or I've been in recruiting for a very long time, since the mid-90s. But I love this business, and I'm currently a principal consultant at Recruiting Toolbox. And I'm going to get this little thing so I can see your beautiful face. There we go. So principal consulting at Recruiting Toolbox, and what does that mean? It means that I help companies with their recruiting process, with taking a look at their interview training or sourcing. I do tons of training, and as an organization, we help all kinds of companies, large and small, tech, non-tech, retailers, medical, financial industry, you name it, we work with them. And you can find us. Can I do a little
Please.
shameless plug? You can find us all at recruitingtoolbox.com, all one word. And before that, I've been in corporate recruiting for many, many years. Worked for companies like Amazon and Starbucks and Microsoft. I worked for Capital One down in Tampa way back in the day. And my role has primarily been as a recruiter or recruiting manager, and a lot of focus on technology. Oh, I work for Yahoo too.
Yeah.
Yahoo friends out there, so shout out to them. So that's where I've been. I spent a little bit of time in agency recruiting. I spent a little bit of time doing executive search.
Yeah. And that's actually how I know you. Internet know, right? I saw you do a presentation on managing your hiring manager and trying to work out that relationship so that you can be successful. Because regardless of your role, if you're in recruiting, you have to manage hiring managers, right?
That's exactly it. In fact, the most successful recruiters are best at that skill. It doesn't matter what you produce as a recruiter, what candidates you find, doesn't matter how great a negotiator you are, doesn't matter how great a sourcer you are. Can I move around? Is that okay?
Yeah, you're good.
Can I tweet while I am doing this? No?
Absolutely. Everyone should tweet. Hashtag our daily.
Everyone should tweet. No, without that skill, your results fall flat, right? They aren't absorbed into the organization. So the best recruiters I know are really great at developing relationships with hiring managers, also with your human resources partners as well. But really mastering that communication piece and having the hiring managers, putty in your hands actually just makes your job a lot easier.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of these webinars do a ton of lip service to that candidate relationship, but not this side of the equation. And that's why I feel so lucky to have you here today. So thank you so much, Carmen.
Thank you for trying this new format. This is great. I like it.
Yeah.
I didn't have to
And
prepare or anything.
the part that I love is that we get to answer real questions
Right.
and put our brains to the test, but also to be able to provide real time feedback instead of creating a deck and assuming that it works for everybody.
Exactly.
So like we said at the beginning, if you have questions, please submit them. And we already have a few come in. We got a few via email that we'll answer first. And then Mary Faulkner already submitted one too. Thank you, Mary. You're awesome. All right. So the first question is from Giselle. She's an agency recruiter and she's curious about getting a hiring manager's attention in their first meeting, which I can imagine would be pretty tough. It's the equivalent of a cold call.
Right. Right. And especially if you've never met that manager before, or that manager has had some issues happen, or that manager may be new, right? So it's understanding their situation as well. The first thing is that we are on a mission at Recruiting Toolbox to not call these meetings intake meetings. This is our goal in life, is to get recruiters. I think words matter, and so let's call them what they are. They are strategy meetings or alignment meetings or kickoff meetings, something that suggests that recruiting is a project, and that everyone has responsibility to contribute to make this project successful. When you say intake meeting, you think about it when I go to the doctor and I do an intake. I don't expect the person who's doing the intake to actually do the surgery or whatever, right?
Right.
Um, so when we use that language, we actually set ourselves up for a little bit of failure. So thinking about that first, the first thing is don't walk into those meetings cold. That was, and I am sharing all this information not because I am a recruiting genius, but because I started at the very bottom in this job, and I learned with every rec, I learned something new and maybe got a little bit better. But I have been the suckiest of sucky recruiters, sending sucky emails and having poor relationships and learning from each of those.
Yeah.
So I will tell you, walking into a strategy meeting or an alignment meeting without having done your homework, again, you show up without very much credibility. So once you know you have an open position, even if you don't know the exact parameters of the position, do your research. Find some candidates to calibrate. Don't wait for the manager to tell you. Even if you don't know exactly where the candidates are going to come from, do a little sourcing, a little digging around. Go and talk to other people on the team or incumbents in the role. Walk in with a set of intelligence, and in fact, write that down so that you're walking in and the manager immediately starts off with this perception that you have given some thought to the plan versus walking in cold and asking the manager to, if you ever get those comments, the recruiter came in and asked me who should they talk to, and I felt like the recruiter wanted me to do his or her job. That's usually what they're referring to. If you look at any other business function, they never show up empty-handed. So do your homework in advance, write it down, use that time to actually get agreements. So this is what I am going to do in terms of sourcing, and hiring manager, this is what I expect you to do in terms of sourcing. Maybe it's
Totally.
posting the position on their LinkedIn page or Facebook page or whatever it is that their responsibilities are. And then going back to your desk, this was the thing that probably changed my life. After that meeting, actually summarizing what happened and sending that follow-up summary. It is a very simple thing. It should take you no more than 5 or 10 minutes,
Yeah.
but it helps to build your credibility. And again, it's just the way that proper business is conducted, I guess.
Exactly. I always tell people, think of the best meeting you had with somebody like a realtor or, someone that you interview, right? People that you could choose from a big group. think about the best meeting, the best experience you had, and try to replicate the parts that made it so memorable.
That's a really great example. If you show up for a meeting with a realtor and they haven't done any research on even your current address, then they're sucky, right? They're not worth. You're going to do more work than they will. So just set yourself up for success. Show up as a professional.
Yep. Awesome. I was just tweeting that because I think that's a great tip.
So I see some.
Absolutely. All right. So our next question, I believe, came straight to your inbox from Sarita. She is an agency senior technical recruiter, right? And she's having an issue where hiring managers are too selective. So I'm guessing she's, narrowing down the funnel. She has it down to those last two, and then they're like, oh, I don't want either.
Don't like this, right? So again, this goes back to it goes right back to that strategy meeting. So a good chunk of that time should be spent nailing down the profile, and not just the job description, but really understanding the job itself. And if you've ever seen me do my sourcing spiel, or if I've done any sourcing training in your org, I start by asking recruiters to tell me about the positions they're working on. And usually they'll tell me, well, I need to hire a Java engineer or a financial analyst. Oh, well, yeah, but what is that? I'll ask. Well, they're a financial analyst and they need to know SAP, and I don't understand SAP. Explain it to me without the jargon. What are they going to do? Why would a company pay someone to do that job with that title? And so really being able to focus and articulate the job itself, and then working with the hiring manager on refining that, right? So, and the reason I ask people to do it without the jargon and all the technology is because if you don't have a great understanding of what's going on in their business, you're going to really struggle to find people who really match the profile. So what's happening is, yes, they need an engineer, maybe with certain technologies, but they need an engineer to build something, and you need to understand what that building is, and finding people who have built something similar at similar scale or similar speed, that's going to serve you more than knowing those technology buzzwords. So that's the first thing. Second thing is knowing how to negotiate. Okay, it sounds like you want the world, it's a purple squirrel, what if I can get you, and maybe you want them to be wearing a cape and you want them to be extra fast. Well, what if I get you a purple squirrel wearing a cape but they walk kind of slow? Would you be willing to talk to that person, right? Well, no, you're not willing to. Well, that's great. You want everything: the fast, wearing the cape, and purple. Great. I can get you all of this, but what my experience tells me is that that's going to take time, right? Or if we're willing to pay top dollar and pay more than what the existing fast purple squirrels wearing capes are making, then we might be able to get them a little bit faster. But there are trade-offs. So you tell me, what trade-off are you willing to make? Are you willing to pay a higher salary? Great. We can probably get what you want, maybe a little faster. If you're not willing to pay that salary, I can do it. It's going to take longer. And then here's the other key. You have to be honest. It's going to take longer, and it probably is going to take 6 months. I know you said you needed this person in 2 weeks, but you've given me an impossible task. Let's be honest. And you probably don't like this answer, but 6 months is what this is going to take from my experience, right?
Yeah. And that's part of the service level agreement that you kind of build with them. Like, here's the base of what they have to have. Here's your nice to have, right? And do you write those out formally, or how do you negotiate those SLAs?
I am not a big fan of SLAs. If we're at the point where we are writing down SLAs and keeping track of each other in this granular way, our relationship probably isn't that great. I am a big fan, though, of documenting what we agreed to and then sharing that back and forth in email. And then sometimes we have to renegotiate. You know what? I told you that this position will be filled in 4 weeks. Looks like it's going to take closer to 6 weeks. Don't share that information on week 5. Share that information in week 3, right? That's how you build credibility, doing what you say you're going to do, and even if that changes, making sure you're staying ahead of the game.
Yes, exactly. Do what you say you're going to do. That's probably the theme that you're going to find of all this advice. Just do what you say you will do. I don't care what your job is. That
You know
works.
what? And don't be afraid of the tough message. As a sucky recruiter, I was always afraid of the tough message. I didn't want to turn down candidates. I didn't want to tell hiring managers that I hadn't filled their positions yet. Um, but quite frankly, as I got better, I got really good at sharing those difficult messages as early as I possibly could. So that helps to build credibility.
Absolutely. And that actually touches on our next question from Mary. Uh, Mary's a friend of mine, so excited to see you here today, Mary. Thank you so much. She said, how do you corral a hiring manager who doesn't think the process applies to them?
Most of them think that they are. Uh, I'm trying to remember who posted this today on Facebook, but I know it was a recruiter who made snowflake cupcakes, special snowflake cupcakes.
Amy.
She said, all my recruiter friends will get the joke. I think every hiring manager thinks that their position is most important and quite special, and the person that they're looking for is quite special. Um, what you do is you kind of bring them into your process as gradually as you possibly can. One of the first conversations you want to have with any manager that you meet is, here's the process and here's how it works, and I can tell you this is how we get there faster. If we want to do things, and I will tell you, hiring managers are so interested in speed, right? I,
Mhm.
I've probably trained, I don't know, a few hundred hiring managers this year. And every single one of them, if they start talking about recruiting, speed is the number one issue. The next issue is candidate quality. Am I getting the people that I need? So you share with them, here's our process. And let's talk about where you might want to have something different. And let's talk about what's possible and what's feasible in my role. And let's talk about what responsibilities I'll carry. And let's talk about what responsibilities you will carry. And if it starts to get too out of hand, then they get to carry more responsibilities. The one thing that you can do once you have this kind of a relationship is hold them accountable, right? They're holding you accountable. You have to hold them accountable. You know what? We have this checklist of activities, and it seems like there are half of them that you haven't completed yet. What's getting in your way? How can I help you? Let's not delay this process. But I
Yeah,
can't take on everything because you just can't. But
absolutely.
sometimes they don't understand the process, right? So they've built their own. So making sure they have a good foundation and good understanding of what it is and what role they're expected to play.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, hiring manager can assume that recruiting works the same way at every organization.
Yes.
And it really doesn't, right? If you've hired one person, it's not going to be the same at a different company, even for the
And,
same
and,
role.
and I think even we assume as recruiters that to some extent at Recruiting Toolbox, we're big on recruiting philosophy. So we like to get talent acquisition leaders, but the entire organization thinking about what's your recruiting philosophy. So who owns recruiting, right? If you
Yeah.
ask that question and the answers aren't the same across the board, then there is no alignment. And so expectations are going to not be met. Or if you ask the question, you know what, if we get to the decision point and there's a huge disagreement, who has the final say, or how do we make that decision? Do we do it by consensus? And some people may really believe in consensus. Others may believe it's the hiring manager decision. I've worked with organizations where the recruiters made the final decision. So
Yep.
if everyone's not aligned on what that looks like, or what do we do when we get a referral and the referral it comes from a bigwig senior leader in the company and the person's not appropriate for the role? Do we hire them anyway? And if the answer is no, we have a higher level of ethics here, then selling that in advance versus when the problem comes along, it's going to
Yeah.
be much more
When you're standing there panicked, like,
uh, problem number 1,263 of the day.
right? Oh man. All right. So next question, we're getting a lot in. So if you have one, please shoot it our way. Thank you so much for being here. Sarmita, and I'm so sorry if I abuse your names. She asked, how do you have the hiring manager compromise on stringent skills? So they must have this, 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 and this, and then they've just made like a tie-dye, rainbow, purpley squirrel that might not even exist. What do you do with that?
I'm a big visual person, so I have to write things down or draw them out. And so the first thing is Again, something that I will bring with me in that strategy meeting is I will take the position, especially if it's technical, and I am sensing that this is for a technical position, and I will diagram it out, just like you're diagramming sentences. I'll start with the engineer, I'll start with the technologies, I'll diagram alternative technologies, I'll diagram alternative frameworks, and then I will put that piece of paper in front of a manager and say, this is my vision of the position. You tell me, will these technologies be suitable substitutes for this technology? Yes, no, I get a clear answer, whatever it is. And then when they start adding the other things, I draw those in there too, right?
Yeah.
And get them to tell me where or what organizations have you seen people with this full skill set? And help me understand how this is not, completely 100% fiction. And I can help you get what you need, but we've got to be certain that it exists somewhere. And so
Right.
usually when faced with paper to pencil, you get a little bit more realistic perspective. But start with that diagramming, like eighth grade diagramming sentences. I For me, that helps me understand the position, but it also is a nice visual aid for the hiring managers to realize, oh, I'm asking for a lot. And then probably what that begs is a bigger discussion on, it sounds like there are some gaps in skills on your team. Do we need to bring HR on board? Do we need to reconsider what your actual need is? Do we need to
Yeah.
up-level the position? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Sometimes it's not just about that role, right? It's about how the whole team and where that balance is if you need to
Exactly.
make other changes along the way.
And once you open up that Pandora's box, you'll have a very rich conversation. You will become viewed as the talent advisor. It's a big credibility builder to have that kind of a conversation.
Absolutely. A question from Lee Ferguson, who's coming at this from an agency perspective. Thanks for being here, Lee. They asked, how can you repair a hiring manager relationship after a failed placement?
Oh, well, the first is to acknowledge, and we have all had those. If you've ever led people, you have made a poor decision if you've done it for any amount of time. The first thing is it's a shared responsibility, right? That hiring manager was involved in the process and also made that decision. So I would approach it as that. Let's actually have a postmortem and talk about what went wrong. What did we do wrong? What could we do better? Let's really understand. And again, being proactive in that, not waiting for it to come to you, but starting from the conversation and
Yes.
bringing everything that you used to recruit this person. This was our sourcing strategy, and this is the profile that we built out, and coming back and saying,
Mhm.
were these the right parameters? Was this the right strategy? Yes,
Yes.
yes. Well, you know what it was? Maybe it was a selection issue. If it was a selection issue, let's go back and dissect. What did we ask? Did we probe deep enough? What do we ask the next time around? Own it and share the ownership.
Absolutely. And I really want to emphasize the part about you said address it as soon as possible. Don't let it lapse and then you're coming back for another role and you're all nervous before you walk in because you know
Yeah.
last time you screwed up. Like
Yep.
address it right away, just as often as you address those process points, like you were mentioning earlier of, okay,
Yeah.
we're in week 3, this is where we should be at, these are the updates. There needs to be that follow-up on that same schedule.
Even if it's, it might start as a hallway conversation. You see your manager in the hallway and you're like, how's Mike working out? And he gives you the like, I don't know things. That means go back to your desk, set up a call, and spend a few minutes talking about what's working, what's not. Um, Maybe even getting your HR person involved.
Yeah. And from the agency side, hey, you can throw around some lunches, get some people in a room, give them some water, whatever it takes.
That helps.
Have the
That helps.
conversation.
I don't think it's a relationship burner. It's actually something that will strengthen your relationship if you work closely to resolve it and not have it, not happen again.
Well, that's how you earn credibility. It's by responsibility is key. You want
That's it.
credibility? Be responsible. Yep,
That's it.
totally.
Good
So we have
question.
a question from the recruiting animal who has joined us today. Thanks for being here, Animal. He says, if you submit a great candidate and the hiring manager says, go find me more, but you say, why? This person's great. Should you refuse to search for more? And we know Animal, so he's probably
I
phrasing it in his
know.
way.
Well, again, it goes back to how you set it up. So I come to that strategy meeting with, here's what I think the funnel will look like. Last time, it took me talking to or screening 15 candidates. From those 15 candidates, I presented 10 of them. From those 10, we selected 5 to interview, and 1 made the cut, right? Some set of numbers that looks like that. So I start with that. Now, if I am submitting them one at a time and it doesn't feel as if I'm submitting 10 total candidates, then I might go back and maybe summarize, here are all the candidates that we've submitted, and maybe a little summary of why they weren't successful, and how we might adjust our search. If, however, I've only submitted 1 candidate and that was not our agreement, then I have some work to do. If we have no agreement and the hiring manager has this huge level of expectations, it went wrong from the beginning. So set those expectations. If you know what, there are only 3 great candidates in this town that can do this and 2 are happily ensconced, and so I'm going to have you talk to 1 candidate, set that expectation in the beginning. And once that candidate's been presented and the candidate and the hiring manager says, I want more, we talked about this, there aren't any more, let's talk about re-articulating the position.
Absolutely. Mike Wolford was telling me how he uses BLS data to kind of show this is the scope of everybody who has these skills, and just giving, okay, if 3,000 people live in the nation, how many people live in your town?
Yes.
How many people are open to getting a job? How many, and walking them through the funnel before it even is at their door.
Exactly. BLS data is fantastic, and sometimes I use that in combination with data from LinkedIn or Indeed, or Wanted Analytics if you have access to that. Here are the number, and we actually have to solve this problem. How many welders are there in Milwaukee? Well, there was a finite number, right? There was somewhere around 4,500, and unemployment was -5. So several people had a couple of welding jobs, right? And on top of that, look at the number of employers in our area who are also looking at welders. So once faced with that kind of data, that gets a hiring manager to put it in perspective. We're not going to be able to bring you an endless supply of people, and if we are, we're really reaching probably the bottom of the barrel.
Exactly. And I think that goes back to what you were saying about, no other, if there's supply chain management, right? There are only 5 tires, and we cannot get you 6 tires when there are only 5, right? So it's the same model of bringing that kind of data into yes. And if you guys don't know what BLS data is, Carmen, do you want to give just a little bit of background about where they can find that and what it's useful for?
Absolutely. I will post, I just found the direct link to the map, but there's also a database. So it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics, bls.gov, and I will tweet after this the actual web address where you can actually drill down and find the data for your city, metropolitan area, for your state. You can get the number of folks with specific skill sets, as well as the unemployment rate, as well as salary information. It's extremely useful. And it's probably the best set of data out there. They've been getting really much better at the database is much improved, and the data's not 100% up to date, but it's probably the best you're going to get.
Absolutely. I'm going to tweet that too to make sure people can see that with #OurDaily.
There you go.
And that's all free and obviously wide open for people to dig into.
Free. It takes 5 seconds to do, right? You walk into a strategy meeting with that information, instant credibility.
Absolutely. A question from Eleni. Thanks for being here. She said, "Hi, ladies. How can you get hiring managers to provide feedback on time and not ignore you?"
Again, that is some expectation setting that you must do, and set your own cadence. Let them know, and if you're an agency recruiter or if you're a corporate recruiter, you've got multiple priorities, multiple people pulling at you, and great candidates don't last in this kind of a market very long. So let them know, I will submit a candidate to you, and you have 72 hours to respond. If within 72 hours you're not interested, I will likely share that candidate with someone else or release them so that they can continue their job search. I don't play around with that. I don't have time for that. Yeah, it just isn't acceptable. And if That isn't acceptable. If you don't have time, shoot me a quick note. I can extend the time. That's fine. Or if you need me to turn off the shoot, or if we need to set up a special time to review resumes, great,
Yep.
we can do that. I will work around that. But what I won't deal with is non-responsiveness. It's just drives me nuts.
Exactly. Well, and I've seen some of the ATSs. I know Lever specifically has some of that built in.
Hmm.
Greenhouse as well, where you can
Yep.
say, okay, this person is expected to respond within this time, and it sets up all the tasks and kind
Right.
of creates a dashboard for the hiring manager so they can see very clearly what their hiring activities
Yeah.
are that they need to address.
Well, I mean, if you're scrappy, you can use a tool like Snapmail, and
Hmm.
the mail, the entire email disappears after whatever time limit you set. So
Yep.
if you let them know, I send snap mails and they disappear after 72 hours. It's amazing when people have deadlines how they respond to them.
I love
Scarcity.
that.
Yeah.
Yes. And I like that urgency too, using
Yeah.
technology to create urgency so it's not just a checkbox that could flip over and
Yeah.
overdue by 10 days, right? It's saying
No,
this is
it
going
goes
to
away.
disappear.
It goes away. It's
Because
gone.
that's the reality, right? If you're
Yeah.
going to let a candidate just sit around for 72 hours, or, when they talk about hiring, I actually was just talking to Mary about this the other day about, a 75-day hiring cycle or a 100-day hiring cycle. It's like, and for government, that's completely real. Like, that's just how it works. But in the private sector,
No.
a Java
Well,
candidate
let's
is not
work
going to
that.
sit
I
around.
walked into organizations and they have recs that are, 500 days old.
Oh, wow.
Why are they still in the system, right? They that isn't acceptable. Yeah.
So what would you do about a rec that's been sitting for 500 days?
Close it immediately. And that's one of those things where, some problems you just get rid, like you don't answer, you don't respond to, and it just goes away. And if there's someone who really cares about it, they will raise their heads and we need to start over. And that's a good way to actually do that. It needs an official redo. It can't go on for another 500 days, right?
Yeah,
So
I'd say at that point,
something's
delete
wrong.
everything,
Right.
right? We're just gonna start clean slate. Let's pretend I've never seen
Uh,
this
it,
fossil. Seriously.
yeah, that's a cry
Um,
for. Yeah.
yeah. And speaking of Mary, we have another question from her. How do you get a hiring manager to avoid hiring themselves? Basically, someone that looks and acts exactly like them.
Oh my gosh. Oh God. This is. I'm actually trying. I'm writing a presentation now on diversity, which is, um, you know, not a topic I actually love to discuss because it's just so nuanced and so complex. Like we don't often get it right. But um, here's what you do, and I think that is a conversation that you have to have about the team. So, what do you have a lot of? And if that person, the manager, leader, has a lot of himself or herself, they will probably find that my team is great at X, and could be my team is great at putting together presentations and being creative, and not great at tracking the finances, right? So pointing that out to them and helping them understand that at least at the skills piece of this, you could probably use a little bit of diversity in your team, helping them see that. The other side of it is fighting battles that you can fight. Sometimes you can't fight those battles. Sometimes I can't be the flag bearer for diversity if you have a hiring manager that's not receptive. And it's rare, but you might encounter that. And in that case, it's patience. It's getting the good candidate in. It's making sure that the interview team is well trained and diverse. Making sure, sometimes sitting in with the manager on their interviews and understanding what is it that why are they making the decisions that they're making, and we don't know that unless we hear what it is that they're asking and how they're making the assessment. Helping them understand. Sometimes I default to humor to get my way sometimes, and I might say something like, "So you're just going to hire a bunch of mini-me's," and get them
It
kind of thinking.
works.
And
Yeah.
sometimes that gets me in trouble, but most of the time they get. I'm trying to make a subtle point there. but putting it in their faces a little bit. But I think a lot of that just comes from fear of making a mistake.
Yeah.
So letting them know that you're going to be there, holding their hand, you get to share the responsibility if a mistake is made, and quite frankly, as you know, leaders move higher in an organization, and as they have been in companies longer and longer, it's not likely that they can pull from their referral pools. At some point, they're going to have to get really good at hiring strangers. So here's a good opportunity to get better at hiring a stranger.
Right. And I'm curious, do you see that more often with people who haven't done a lot of hiring or people who have, or a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. Some people have been doing it
Yeah.
for years my way, and this works for me, and that's great. The only, you can pray that they've had an exposure to a diverse set of people in their career,
Right.
and sometimes that pans out, sometimes it doesn't. But people who are new to hiring are definitely afraid of making a mistake.
Yeah.
And so helping them build their confidence in decision making, helping them build their confidence around interviewing, really helping them understand uh, not only this is the profile and what we're looking for, but these are the questions that we ask to get there. And these are the answers that we're listening for so that the person we select will actually match that profile. So getting them comfortable with that, sitting in with them, coaching, um, you know, sending interview tips, whatever works to sort of help them strengthen that, I think will get you there. But I think people who are newer in their careers are so afraid of making mistakes with hiring.
Well,
So
and they,
yeah, big responsibility.
and I'm sure, I mean, it's human psychology to interview someone, see yourself in them, and feel more trusting of them because you see you, right? You trust yourself, you trust them. And I think, if you're sending somebody into an interview who's never interviewed before without some of that stuff you were talking about, that's an inevitability that they're going to end up relying on their psychology to
Right.
pick the person that their gut says is the one, which is really
Right.
just the closest reflection of themselves.
So Katrina, if you were hiring someone and they came in and they had kind eyes, right?
Inside joke, I think.
You would be all over hiring them. So you've got to get that hiring manager to articulate why do you like this person? What is it about this person? And the minute you say kind eyes, I say, that's great, but they don't know how to use Excel, right?
Yep.
Kind eyes, that's one criteria. We can use that all across the board if we want to, but we also need to make sure that the other criteria is included. But getting them to
Yeah.
articulate, well, I like the fact that, they show up early and they're prepared and they're on time. That's great. That's one criteria. It's one set of criteria we'll use to assess candidates, but there's also all of this, and so we can't ignore any of that, actually. If that's important to you as a manager, you get to use that as part of your criteria, as long as it's legal. I
Yes.
don't know if kind eyes would be legal.
Um,
I say yes. I say
yeah, I'll give you that.
kind eyes. Yeah.
It was not pretty or yeah. Well, and I think that coaching, especially if you're going into a company planning on being there for a long time, coaching gives you credibility because the next time that that person, has appointed someone on their team to go interview, they're going to say, Carmen taught me a lot about interviewing. If you're feeling nervous at all, make sure you ask her before you go in, what's
Right.
important and how you can do better.
Exactly. Exactly.
Right.
A little bit, I think, in debrief meetings, using a little bit of the postmortem and just kind of assessing how the process go and how comfortable you feel interviewing. Was any part of
Yeah.
this difficult? Just a little bit of time discussing those issues that helps.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Um, I was just tweeting that coaching new managers can only help your credibility because, I have to tell you, I've been sent into many an interview without any coaching from the company as far as what I was supposed to be doing or what I was getting towards, as a peer interview. And I've heard horror stories about these types of interviews, and it's just so important that we take the time to really talk to people.
Absolutely.
And yeah,
You want to know
they
the
can't have credibility.
number one way to improve your recruiting process? Something you can implement today and change
Go.
everything. 100% improve. It's what we call at Recruiting Toolbox an alignment meeting. So it's not your strategy meeting. it's not what you have at the beginning with the hiring manager. It's actually a meeting that the hiring manager leads. And that meeting, and you can support it as the recruiter, maybe you can be there as the recruiter, um, and that meeting is meant for all the interviewers so that everyone gets on the same page. This is what we're looking for. This is the assignment that each interviewer has so that no one walks
Mhm.
in thinking, what am I here? What am I doing? Here's how we're assessing, and here's how the process will go. That meeting
Yes.
alone, and it can be 15 minutes, or it could be an email. It can be an email that you as the recruiter ghostwrite for the manager to send to his or her team. Talk about credibility building,
Mhm.
right? They probably haven't thought of this. You not only did you think about it, but you made it easy for them to do. So um, something like that will improve your process. It will improve your candidate experience because you won't have several interviewers tripping over themselves and asking the same questions. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, lots of
Terrible for everyone.
terrible for everyone, right? And we'll make sure that you get the best set of data about the candidates. So, um, yeah, use that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Um, Lots more questions came in. I definitely like bogarted your. Okay, so a question from Eleni. She's an in-house recruiter. How can you make a hiring manager provide more detailed feedback other than just saying candidate X is a no? Because we've all been there before. They just say no.
Yeah. And or the thumbs up in the hallway. That's my favorite. I It's tough because that goes back to your recruiting philosophy and how you recruit and how rigorous are you. And I had the good fortune of working for a couple of companies that were extremely uh, uh, just demanding when it came to feedback. And in fact, managers prided themselves on writing long, long narratives about candidates. I don't think that was the right way to go at a large software company based in Redmond, Washington. There's something in between that and having detailed feedback. I think um, the, the best advice I can give is set up a pattern, right? So if they were assigned to interview a certain set of skills, make sure that the interview feedback form or whatever it is that you're using, your applicant tracking system, helps them share those 3 bullet points. And if you can build it into the technology in some way or send a follow-up email that asks pointed questions, they're not always quite sure what you want from them. We actually do a lot of training about how to write, how to actually assess a candidate, and then write the feedback.
Great.
And it sounds like a area of minutia to train, but people are very grateful because it's just not a skill that we learn. And I've worked in companies, or I've worked with companies that had the hiring committee form of recruitment, and if you don't write great feedback, your hire will not get through the hiring committee. So that is, if you're working for a Google or some of the companies in Silicon Valley, you quickly become adept at writing feedback. But, set up a half-hour brown bag and train your hiring teams how to
Yeah.
write feedback, right? What to
Yeah.
listen for and how to write it up and how to do so efficiently.
And
And
make it mandatory. And I think you've said this before. You have to take that training before you can interview anyone.
exactly, exactly.
Totally.
Yep.
Um, a comment slash kind of question from Animal.
All
Um, so
right.
Carmen can put on a stern mom's voice. It sounds like personality is necessary to impress your authority on a hiring manager. Discuss.
Have a stern mom's voice. Like I'm just like processing this, right? Hashtag stern mom's voice.
From Animal of all people, though. Let's just
Right,
let's.
right. I have sort of a deep voice, and I actually think that voice is important, especially over the phone. When I'm talking to candidates, often I stand up and walk around and have this kind of, I guess, stern salesy voice. Um, Figure out what your personality is. I use a lot of humor, and I get things done. So, just make sure your personality doesn't include using smiley faces and emojis in your email. That kind of
Or 12 exclamation points.
yeah. I am an exclamation point user. That
12
might
though in a row.
12 in a row.
Yeah.
But figure out where you can come from a place of authority, because I think sometimes as recruiters we do ourselves a disservice by pretending to be the learner or the junior person in this relationship. And that's not always true. I think sometimes we have a lot more knowledge about what we do than our hiring managers have, and we should feel confident about sharing that. We should feel confident about giving advice. I have given advice and pushed back to people with PhDs and very senior degrees and science degrees, and they actually have appreciated it, because while they were huge experts in what they did, they had not taken the time to study what I do, and so I had some information that was useful to them. So wherever your place of authority comes from, figure out what that is in your delivery. That's important. Over time, I've developed my stern mom's voice with a side of humor, and that seems to work for me.
Yeah. Same.
I am forever just, I am neither stern or a mom, so I don't know how this is even, wow. If you said, your Beyonce voice or something, I might go for that.
I'm with you. I'm with you. Um, a question from Lee. He's asking, have you ever had to go further than a Kickstart meeting to the point where you felt the need to job shadow to understand the position more fully?
I love, well, being in tech recruiting quite a bit, I actually have a huge fondness for developers and what they do. And so I would often just hang out just for the sake of just trying to figure out what they did. And in doing so, that helps me learn about just the environment and what they're doing. I might even, I'm listening, pick up another, place that I can x-ray and source candidates. So I to the extent that you can do that and not be disruptive, I'm a big fan of that. Call the department coordinator and get yourself invited on all team meetings, just so that you can listen in on what's happening in the business as often as you can. Um, if it helps for you to actually spend some time, usually those kinds of requests, no one says no, and in fact, people appreciate it. So if you can do that, absolutely.
Yeah, which I've heard is especially helpful if you have no idea what those people do. Even if you and the hiring manager have an awesome relationship, it's probably the better environment, right? Go in there. Like Amy over at Microsoft was telling me, she just moved into a role hiring data scientists.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, I'm hiring PhDs. Like I PhD data scientists,
Yeah.
people with their own patents, and
Yeah.
she's like, I had to sit there and just like take it in for a
Take it
while.
in, and then go home, and you've got, in that instance, and I know Amy is awesome, and I'm sure
Yeah.
this is exactly what she's doing because she's a nerd too. Um, just that, I mean, that's the kind of actually challenge that I love, because it becomes, I immerse myself in it. I go home and I try to read papers about data science. I will get myself signed up for a data science conference. I will sit in on the team meetings, and eventually, if you're really paying attention and looking up things that you don't know, you will have a bit of a language around it, and you will have a bit of understanding, and that just goes along, especially if you're in technology. You have to not only learn what the words mean, but you have to have a little bit of a love for it, and um,
Yes.
yeah, it's uh, I don't know. That's why I love doing this, because you just get to learn
Yeah.
about something
And
cool,
a
new
love
thing.
for people too, that
Yeah.
empathy. I was joking with someone, I don't know if it was you, but very recently, talking about how, if I were sitting in a group of sourcers and I said empathy was the most important, they'd probably ask me how to download that Chrome extension. I was like, it's one of those things, like when you love people and you love helping people, you just want to know, you want to be the expert so that you can be, a credible, reliable source for finding great people to build your company. You have to have that
And
like pride.
it's easy to sit on, in another building and make fun of the engineers and call them nerds. It's not so easy to do that when you go and you sit in the middle and you figure out what their problems are and how they've worked on something all day, and suddenly, they submit a new bit of code and the whole thing is completely broken and they can't figure it out. It's a whole different, or to go and look at, their Scrum board and find out, where they are in the project and what's stalling. It's a whole different way of being
Yes.
when you get involved in your teams in that way. There's a huge part of empathy, and that I think actually helps drive great sourcers. I don't, there are several places where that we all rely on. The best sourcers have other places to go. So,
Yep.
and I know it's
So, yeah. No, we have time for one more question, and I think it's a great time to end on humor, since that's one of our mutual bonds and something you referred to as a key
you're
element of your
mom,
personality.
right?
Mary asked, "What's the most ridiculous request you've ever had from a hiring manager?"
A ridiculous request from a hiring manager. Well, I can tell you this. It was really it started with the candidate moving from North Carolina to Washington State, and apparently the candidate had ferrets. And there are apparently laws that prohibit certain ferrets from coming into the states of other ferret state having states. I know nothing about ferrets, but I had to learn a little bit about ferrets because the hiring manager, of course, wanted to hire that. I had other great candidates, but this was the candidate that the hiring manager wanted to bring on board. I was working. This was an agency situation, so I had to finesse through and figure out the laws around transporting and granting citizenship of ferrets from one state to another. And that's when you learn, like, what you're made of, right? When you're
Yeah.
calling state agencies and you're asking about, whether or not ferrets can move to this town. But we made it happen. I'm not going to say how.
I was just about to say, who do you
Yeah.
call? Is there like animal control? And you're like, so I'd like to know your ferret policies.
I find myself in realms of like state offices that I never knew existed. So
I'm gonna need the rest of that story some other time. But
yeah,
that's all of our time for the day. Carmen, thank you so much for doing this. This was really fun.
this was fun. This is
Um, Yeah, and thank you everyone who's on the line. If you're wondering if you're going to get a copy of this recording, the answer is yes. We will make sure that you get a copy of this video within 48 hours. And I'm also going to share the list and the questions that you asked today with Carmen so she can follow up because I know there were a few that we did not get to answer. So again, Carmen, thank you so much. Everyone who's on the line, thank you. And we're going to wrap up for the day. We'll see all of you very soon. Thank you so much.
thanks, guys.